Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Time-Crossed Lovers in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 11, The Old Soldier. Byleth was thankful that the demonic beast she believed to be Maurice seemed calm. When she, Marianne, and the others had found him last time, he'd been violent from the start. Though he did try to warn them away, so hopefully they can have a conversation this time. She can see Dimitri tense beside her, his grip on her hand tightening almost uncomfortably. Byleth hopes neither of them gets spooked and attacks. If such a thing were to happen, no one would get any answers. Exactly, so remaining calm was important. The oppressive fog probably wasn't helping anyone's nerves. I do have a request, if you do not mind, Byleth. If conversation is indeed possible, I would like to ask some questions personally. That would mean taking over her body, like when Suthies first fully woke up. Only temporarily, and only with your permission. That seems reasonable. But first, they need to see how much control Maurice has over himself at the moment. Well? Why do you carry their crests? Maurice rounded on her. Why do you carry his crest? I believe he is referring to the so-called King of Liberation. Undoubtedly, but why does he sound so angry? Byleth knows Nemesis was a monster, but wouldn't his men have respect for him? He did give them power, ill-begotten as it was. Though maybe that was the issue. Power clearly hadn't done much for Maurice. Suthies can have her turn in a moment. Byleth has her own questions to ask first. I have no connection to Nemesis, my bond is with Suthies herself, the one the crest really belongs to. Maurice sat on his haunches, causing the ground to tremble. Are you truly Maurice, the original human bearer of the crest of the beast? The wandering beast stared down at her. Byleth could feel Dimitri shifting beside her, but her attention was on the potential threat before them. Yes. Maurice couldn't make facial expressions with his visage, but he somehow managed to look sad. It seems our suspicions were correct. How did this happen to you? Except for Miklon in Conan Tower, Byleth hadn't seen anything quite like this. Though when the other original crested humans died, they were still human. I overexerted myself, both with my crest and weapon. I was always able to transform parts of myself, but the more I did it and the longer I stayed that way, the more it happened involuntarily. Power always comes at a price, divine power is no different. It was not meant for humans to wield. Suthies didn't sound pleased by the revelation. Did you know? Dimitri's voice was cold. Did you know where your crest came from? Were you present when the Red Canyon received its nickname? Byleth could feel Dimitri's hand trembling. Did any of you know what you were drinking, where your weapons came from? Maurice lowered his head, seemingly unable to look at them anymore. Dimitri did not expect to feel so angry. Maurice had not lived an enviable life, yet this was someone who directly benefited from a genocide. A benefit Dimitri had inherited. He had always found his strength monstrous, now he knew its very origin was grotesque. Did his ancestor know? Dimitri thought he'd never know for sure, but here's his chance. For better or worse? Answer me. Dimitri heard a crack and saw that the steel lance he'd been holding had snapped in half. You're a Bladdid, aren't you? The one I knew was always kind to me. Did you know? Did any of you know? Maurice seemed to deflate further. No. Nemesis went to the canyon alone. He said a monster was sleeping there and he would slay it, so he rode ahead. When we finally arrived, everything was already over. All we saw were slain dragons, we did not know they were also people. Those who hadn't transformed were nowhere in sight. Maurice started swinging his head back and forth. Nemesis and his infernal mages told us they were just mindless beasts, and we had no reason to disbelieve them. Things were getting unnaturally quiet again, it made Dimitri feel uneasy. Maurice started thrashing around. My beastly blood is rousing, you will not be able to stop me. Before Dimitri could reach for a new weapon, he saw a bright green light out of the corner of his eye. Byleth let go of his hand and walked towards the thrashing beast. His beloved had a green glow around her as she extended a hand to touch Maurice. When she made contact, the beast suddenly calmed. Be calm now. I still have questions I'd care to ask. That wasn't Byleth's voice, it was too high-pitched. He recognized it all the same. I am Suthes, the one you and yours desecrated. The one whose family you massacred for power. Dmitri fell to his knees. The goddess was standing before him, he was unworthy to gaze upon her. Still, if Suthes was using her body, what had happened to Byleth? Worry not, boy, Byleth is still here. As my vessel I can make use of her body, but I am only doing so now with her permission. Once I've had my say we will switch back. Maurice seemed to deflate further. We did not know anything. Like fools we blindly followed the strong, believing it would keep ourselves and our families safe. It excuses nothing, but Nemesis lied to us. He never even warned us of the risks. Maurice shuddered. He and his mages seemed pleased when I became this. I had a family, who I could never trust myself to be around again, who I had been fighting for in our era of chaos, and they thought this was a good thing. They cared not for me and the others, they just wanted more soldiers, more weapons. He lowered his head. I felt nothing but disgust. In them, in myself, in my friends. Dmitri could relate. He felt revulsion at the reality of inheriting such a legacy, to be the one who inadvertently started it. Nemesis bragged about how I could be of use in tracking and killing the remaining Nabateans. How we could kill them and claim even more crests for our army. How some escaped or weren't in Xanadu to begin with and had hidden amongst humans. The mages even mentioned potential half-breeds also among the common people, each possibly with a crest of their own. It was then I realized the full ramifications of what I had done. His voice shook. I hadn't drunk the blood of a mindless, dangerous animal, but of a person who likely wasn't too dissimilar than me. I fled that night and have wandered this forest ever since. Is that why you disappeared from history? Because you abandoned Nemesis and stayed out of sight? It is likely. I was too ashamed and afraid to throw myself at Cirrus's feet, as I should have. Instead, I abandoned my friends and family and lived in seclusion. It seemed a fitting punishment. I had become a monster in more than just appearance. Morris's tail flailed from side to side. I did not deserve to see those I cared about again. With how violent I was becoming, it wasn't safe for me to be around anyone either. They were better off without me. Were you aware that you still have living family? For all that Dmitri could relate to Maurice, he could not imagine abandoning everyone he cared about. Despite his own bloody past, Dmitri was still fighting to have the privilege of standing at his beloved's side. We know someone our age who has your crest. She once told my vessel that your crest was cursed and that those who have it are doomed to become a beast. The poor girl, I hope she fares better than I have. Was that really all they could hope for? That Marianne would be lucky? Suthes looked dejected. Perhaps she was having similar thoughts. What can you tell me about Nemesis and his mages? Suthes sighed. I wish to be prepared for our inevitable clash. They have already targeted my vessel on multiple occasions and their schemes run deeply into Fodlan's roots, even today. They were all selfish, self-serving tyrants. All of them put on airs of wanting to help, but they cared for naught but their self-interests. The mages referred to all of us as beasts from the beginning, and Nemesis was always a violent bandit king. Becoming a warlord only exacerbated his worst qualities. Maurice shook his head. The people revered him though, as they rarely interacted with him. All they saw was what he left in his wake, the destruction of the demonic beasts and other threats to him. If Nemesis ever had time to properly rule, like he desired, they would have had their image of the respected king of liberation shattered. His thrashing tail took out a tree. Suthes didn't flinch. He believed the strong should lord over the weak and that he deserved everything good in the world. He cared not for helping people, though he was adept in making others think he did. Dmitri could not imagine ruling over his kingdom with such a mindset. He gathered all of us to him with promises of not only power, but protection. Saying pretty words about no longer living in fear or strife. All we did was exchange one terror for another. Maurice tilted his head to the side. Nemesis and the mages did not get along. They were using each other. After my transformation became permanent, the mages approached me with wishes of doing experiments in hopes of replicating my condition they called it. He picked up a rock and crushed it in his forepaw. They wanted the same thing to happen to all of us. Nemesis on the other hand had spoken at length about getting rid of them when their uses ran out. Have you seen the mages since you fled to the woods? Morris's tail stilled. Yes. They periodically track me down and give me empty promises. Usually saying they can cure me or give me ways to calm my mind. He gave a bitter laugh. All lies. They still crave power. I am nothing but a potential weapon to them. Even if they weren't lying, what do I have to gain from returning to my human form? Maurice mournfully looked up towards the sky. My friends are gone, my wife and children have long since passed, even the Fodlan I knew has ceased to exist. There is nothing for me in the outside world. Even if there was, my penance for my crimes has not been paid. This forest and my very body are my well-deserved cages. Do you know what they want? Have they been here recently? Time is a difficult thing for me to keep track of, but the last time they tried to entice me into their service they spoke of a war brewing. A war they claimed to have ignited the spark for long ago. Perhaps that was in reference to whatever they were doing in the Empire. Morris's tail began flailing again. They wanted me to fight for them, to help them exterminate as many people as I could. They cared not for which army I attacked, they wanted all killed. For each army I helped with they promised me rewards of power, lucidity, and eventually my human body again. Maurice shook his head from side to side. Nearsighted fools. They still believe they own Fodlan then. I shouldn't be surprised that even after more than 1,000 years, nothing has changed. Dimitri remembers Suthies saying something similar when they first met. The Agarthans believe they have the right to rule over everything and have no qualms about what methods they used. It was sickening. What is it that you want, Maurice? Suthies' voice was surprisingly calm. If what the Agarthans were offering you was not tempting, then what is your desire? Before Maurice could answer, his whole body began to thrash about. Dimitri could also hear the screeches and growls of other demonic beasts echoing throughout the area. Unfortunately, it appears the time for talking has ended. Suthies turned to look at him. Dimitri, be a dear and take care of the demonic beasts heading our way. Byleth and I will handle Maurice. As you command, he said with a slight bow. Dimitri grabbed a javelin and threw it at an incoming giant bird. Hopefully he won't have to defeat too many demonic beasts. Capable as he knows she is, Dimitri doesn't like the idea of leaving Byleth to fight alone. Even as they switch back, Byleth could still feel Suthies' mixed emotions. Her friend was still furious about what happened to her family, but at the same time Maurice had clearly paid a steep price at all. At least towards this poor soul I feel mostly pity. Byleth could hear Dimitri fighting as Maurice took a swipe at them. Please do not hold back, I believe it is time to end his torment. Easier said than done, Maurice was deceptively fast. To make it easier to dodge the oncoming blows, Byleth blasted Morris's shields with aura. I cannot be stopped. This wasn't easy, but Byleth was managing to hold her own. What she was worried about was Dimitri. He was all alone, while Byleth at least had Suthies. Dimitri! How are you doing? She could hear the sounds of his fights but couldn't risk looking. I am fine, Byleth, please do not concern yourself with me. Listen to the boy, you must focus on yourself. Morris's roar jolted Byleth back into focus. His shields were gone, it shouldn't take much more from her to end it. I'm sorry. Byleth drew her steel sword and struck Maurice, while Suthies aided her in dodging his retaliatory strikes. All too soon Maurice collapsed, and the remaining demonic beasts fled. Byleth kneeled before her fallen foe and put a hand on his face. I am sorry this happened to you. May we switch again? Byleth let herself relax as she felt Suthies take over. Thank you for all that you told us. Suthies moved her thumb across what might have been Morris's skin. I will make sure the Agarthans do not doom another to your fate. Thank you, my 1,000-year nightmare is finally over. I am sorry for my horrific actions towards the Nabateans. Thank you. Byleth could hear the clatter of fallen metal and Dimitri coming up behind them, but she couldn't look away. The second she did it would all be over. Take the sword and do with it as you will, it should never have been created. And my descendant, tell her to protect those she cares about and only fight for a cause she believes in. His voice sounded less deep. Was this how he sounded before he transformed? We will. Maurice took a deep breath. Thank you, you are very kind. As his breathing stopped, Maurice started disappearing. Soon all that was left was bloodgong and human bones. As Suthies relinquished control of her body, Byleth felt Dimitri sit down next to her. Is it wrong that all I can really feel right now is pity? Dimitri put a hand on her shoulder. I was so angry when we first found him, but now. Byleth turned to face him. Dimitri looked so downtrodden. She leaned into his side. I feel much the same way. Whatever wrongs he may have done, I think 1,000 years trapped in your body like it was a cage is enough of a punishment. Byleth relaxed her posture. It doesn't excuse anything, but you can only punish someone so much. Morris's life had become a nightmare, he didn't deserve to stay that way forever. A millennium was more than enough. He spent 1,000 years like that. Dimitri winced as he hugged her side. I cannot imagine doing such a thing, how much mental anguish Maurice must have been suffering through every time he returned to himself. Feeling his flinch, Byleth looked at the arm that was wrapped around her lower back. The armor Dimitri was wearing had done a decent job at protecting him, but she could see some blood stains. You're hurt. Why didn't you say anything? Before he could answer, Byleth had pulled away so she could concentrate on healing his wounds. Dimitri at least had the decency to look embarrassed. I apologize, truthfully I hadn't noticed until I sat down. He gazed at her over the glow of heal. Thank you for your assistance, but you do not need to waste your magic reserves on me. I can use a vulnerary, or perhaps a concoction. Don't be ridiculous, I still have lots of magic left. Byleth finished healing Dimitri's arm then stood up. Do you think we did it? The fog appears to have lifted and I can't hear the demonic beasts anymore. Dimitri stood up as well and surveyed the area. That seems to be a reasonable conclusion. Anything in the vicinity would have smelt my blood. I'm certain if any demonic beasts remained, they would have come to attack us. He moved to pick up the lance he had dropped earlier. Perhaps we should explore for a bit then be on our way. I would also like to give Maurice a proper burial, he deserves to rest after everything. Byleth nodded in agreement and moved to follow but stopped when she saw the carnage before her. What happened? The whole area Dimitri had been fighting demonic beasts in while her back was turned was decimated. Trees were torn up, there were large indents in the ground, mounds of dirt were everywhere, and wood, steel and mithril were periodically thrown about the field. Dimitri cleared his throat. I had to deal with a number of foes while you fought Maurice. He paused for a moment. I might have gotten a bit overzealous with my crest in my worry for you. At least we have materials to fix our weapons. That was a decent point. When you bury Maurice, burn the bones. It will give him a decent send-off and ensure that any Agarthans who come looking in the future will have nothing to find. We should also try to do the same with the sword. I do not know if it will work, but the one it was made from deserves to rest as well. Also, a reasonable plan. Byleth turned to Dimitri. Let's get to it then. We have a fair amount of work to do before we can head back out. Chapter 12, Divine Discussions. Dimitri had insisted they build and light Morris's pyre by hand and without magic. Byleth saw no issues with the request. It would take them a little longer, but this wasn't a simple campfire they were making. Do you think any Agarthans will come by soon? Dimitri sounded worried as he placed the wood on the ground. Maybe it wasn't Morris's presence, but they're doing that demonic beasts are so prevalent in these woods. Byleth wiped sweat from her brow as she put down her own bundle of wood. It is possible, but we cannot assume every bad thing we stumble upon is the doing of the Agarthans. Maurice said they'd already been by within the last year or so. He hadn't given an exact date, but Maurice did indicate it was when war was about to break out. I don't think they came around too often to make offers of alliance with him. For now, demonic beast activity has gone down and that should be enough. As they arranged the wood into the proper patterns for the pyre, Byleth could feel how uneasy Suthies was. Her friend had been very quiet since they began, and it worried her. Byleth had to focus on the task at hand though and worked towards granting both Suthies and Dimitri's requests. Soon enough, the pyre was built, and Dimitri was placing the bones onto it as Byleth light a fire. Not long after, Byleth threw Bloodgong in as well. Once it had settled into the blaze, she activated her crest and cast fire onto it to be safe. She couldn't help but wonder who the bones came from. Who was he or she as a person? What would they think of all this? As they watched the bones succumb to the flames, Byleth was filled with more foreboding questions. Did Maurice have to become a beast? Why didn't any of the others fall prey to the curse? Maybe they did and it was erased from history like so many other unsettling facts. The crest scholar she saved Marianne from seemed convinced that Marianne could turn into a beast. Was that theoretically true? Could anyone descendant from those who stole Nabatean blood potentially suffer that fate? I don't know. That was probably the most chilling answer of all. When he and Byleth returned to the inn they left their horses Dimitri felt exhausted. He just wanted to lie down and not think for a while. You can go sleep in our room if you'd like, said Byleth from next to him. I want to see if there are any jobs that might take us in the direction we want to go. His beloved was so kind and smart. He was incredibly lucky. Wait. Did she say room? Dimitri could feel the blush spreading across his face. Our room? Are we sharing a room? That was highly inappropriate. They might have been engaged before, but they weren't even courting now. Sleeping next to each other when they were camping was one thing, but in a room? Byleth gave him an exasperated look. I told you about that after we took care of our horses. Before we went back to the forest. Most of the rooms are booked and we don't have enough money for 2 of them, not if we want to conserve funds for the trip back. Byleth sighed. I know this probably makes you uncomfortable, but it's just one night and we don't need to sleep physically near each other. Now that he thinks about it, Dimitri can vaguely remember Byleth saying something like that to him when they were walking. Truthfully, he had been distracted at the time and wasn't paying nearly as much attention to her words as he should have been. He was too focused on her anger and trying to put an end to the tension. Dimitri cannot help but also feel a pang of regret at Byleth's words. Does she think the idea of sleeping near her repulses him? That cannot be it, she knows he still wants them to eventually get married. Did he do something to make her think otherwise? The last few days had been challenging and they fought a bit, but surely she doesn't think his feelings to be so flimsy. I know how propriety is important to people of your status, but please try to make do for one night. Oh, Byleth didn't think he was ashamed of her, she was just worried about his reaction given his upbringing. He really was a lucky man. His beloved was so easily able to take into account how his reaction would be different from hers. He stepped forward and took one of her hands, pressing it to his lips. I thank you, my beloved, for taking my comfort into consideration, but I shall be fine. For a moment Dimitri could see Byleth's cheeks turn red. It was a brief, but beautiful sight. One he desperately hoped to see again. Byleth took her hand out of his and held it to her chest. I've asked you not to call me that. She handed him a key and turned towards the inn's entrance. Here's our room key, go get some sleep. I'll be back once I find some leads on a job. Of course, please don't stay out too late. You need to rest as well. Byleth nodded and was out the door. Her reaction to his affections was expected, but not deterring. He actually got Byleth to blush, something he hadn't thought was possible. She cares about him. That is what matters. He just needs to be patient, eventually admitting as much will be easier for her. Byleth is most definitely worth the wait. After about an hour Byleth started walking back towards the inn. She had found a few interesting prospective jobs and would run them by Dimitri in the morning. He deserved to have a say in what jobs they took. It will probably only take one more job to get us close to our destination. Shamhala is so close, we just need to go a little farther. Once they got there, they'd have to keep a low profile, but hopefully some information could be gathered. Even if all they could do was confirm her knowledge from before was still accurate, it would be a worthwhile trip. The Agarthans were dangerous in general, but the fact that no one knew anything about them only added to it. Outside of the remaining Nabateans, Edelgard, and Hubert, and Dimitri and herself, Byleth is reasonably certain no one even knows they exist. The most dangerous enemy is one that you cannot see coming. Byleth will not let herself be caught unawares, not again. We will stop them, mark my words. The Agarthans will not put everyone in jeopardy for much longer. She'll have to talk with Dmitri about how they should handle things. He cannot just order his army to march on Shamhala. Not only is it not located in the kingdom, but no one will have any idea about who they are attacking. They also cannot start telling everyone about the Agarthans. One of their advantages is that no one knows how much they know. Throwing away such an advantage would be foolhardy. Byleth is tried though, such thoughts would serve her better in the morning. As she walks through the inn's door, Byleth stretches and surveys her surroundings. Dmitri is nowhere to be seen, so hopefully he took her advice and went to bed. Do you have a preference for which job you take? Asking the boy is all well and good, but you should have your own opinion. There were a few good ones. Defending a caravan from bandits, escorting a doctor into a forest to find herbs, even taking care of some more demonic beasts. Though Byleth would like to take the job from a rich merchant. There was something about that job that made me uneasy. That's why Byleth wants to take it. She also has a feeling Dmitri will agree with her once she explains herself. If you say so, I'm rather interested now myself. Byleth chuckled as she entered her and Dmitri's room for the night. As she had hoped, Dmitri was asleep. However, he was sleeping on one of the chairs the room offered instead of the bed. Byleth wasn't surprised that Dmitri opted to leave the bed for her. Ever the gentleman, huh? It is a very Dmitri thing to do. Of course it is, that boy adores you. Byleth would prefer it if Dmitri would care less about her and more about himself. He was more tired than she was, he should have taken the bed. Not that it matters anymore, if she wanted him to take the bed Byleth would have to wake him up. He looked so peaceful, she couldn't do that. There was a time when they would have probably shared the bed, but such days had long since passed. Byleth shook her head as she climbed under the covers. Now wasn't the time for those kinds of thoughts. She needed to sleep so she'd be ready for whatever the next day brought. Sweet dreams. If that wasn't ominous. Dmitri suddenly found himself in the throne room again. He'd originally been dreaming about his blunder in the goddess tower. The dejected look on his beloved's face when he'd lied about his wish still haunted him. Perhaps if he hadn't done that they might still be together now. It is possible that the goddess, like Byleth, had believed him when he said he was joking about wanting them to be together forever. If so, the walls Byleth had carefully built between them were a fitting punishment. I am not so cruel as that. Dmitri nearly jumped, looking up to see the goddess lounging on her throne. Besides, you are not that good of a liar. The goddess gave a careless wave of her hand. Byleth was not adept at reading emotions at the time, but any who were wouldn't be so easily fooled. He felt himself flush, apparently the goddess could see into his thoughts. Considering his relationship with her holy vessel, it was an unsettling idea. Wait, if he was here then? Dmitri looked around, eagerly hoping to see Byleth as well, but found himself alone at the bottom of the stairs. It is just you and me right now, boy. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you while Byleth is asleep. Dmitri bowed. If that is your desire, though I am unsure of what we could converse about. You clearly already know what I'm going to say. The goddess shook her head and laughed. I am not a mind reader, except with Byleth of course. I simply caught a glimpse of your dream and felt echoes of your thoughts as I pulled you here. I also know you quite well. You have been a constant presence at her side as I've been watching over Byleth after all. The goddess smiled at him. Thank you, by the way, for being there when I could not. It was a pleasure to be there for Byleth. Dmitri smiled back at the goddess. She deserves more than I could ever have given her. That is debatable, but not the reason I brought you here. The goddess stood up from her throne and descended the stairs until she was standing before him. I wish to speak with you about a few important topics. While I generally prefer Byleth's company over not having it, I fear her being here would disrupt our conversation. Her voice became subdued. Her insights are wonderful, but I need your unfiltered thoughts on a few things. I'm sure I could have. The goddess cut him off. Really? She raised an eyebrow. You expect me to believe that Byleth's presence wouldn't influence your thoughts? That was a good point. Dmitri bowed again. So, what were the subjects you wish to speak about? First, there is no need to be so formal with me. You may relax and even call me by my name if it doesn't make you uncomfortable. Dmitri considered that he could relate to that desire, given his own struggles to get people to use his own given name. The goddess Nosuthes smiled at him. I would like us to have a good relationship. After all, we have someone in common that we both care a great deal for. She clapped her hands together. Now that that is settled, we can move on to more important matters. Dmitri never thought he'd be in such a situation, though he's not sure who could imagine having a conversation with a literal goddess. How are you feeling, by the way? Everything with Maurice was it was not easy. Suthisa's voice became soft. We both had reasons to feel anger and betrayal, different though they may have been. Her eyes became melancholy. You were rather quiet on the walk back. I am fine. There is nothing for you to worry about. Suthis did not look like she believed him. It's okay if you feel any number of negative emotions. What you thought was a legacy to be proud of, turned out to be something very different. Why did Syros write such falsehoods in the scriptures? If she hadn't, would he even be king right now? Would he have been just one of the people, like a farmer or a mercenary? Or would his family line have been exterminated for the crimes his ancestor committed? I'm not sure if this brought you any comfort, but Maurice did say that Nemesis lied to his underlings. They did not know the true origins of crests or the hero's relics. She put a hand on his shoulder. Maurice was regretful for what happened, so it wouldn't be unreasonable to consider that some of the others had similar feelings. It is just something I'm going to have to learn to live with. I thank you for your consideration. It disgusts Dmitri to think about how his family and so many others have benefited from such violence, but there is nothing he can do about it. You are not responsible for the actions of those who lived a millennium ago. What you can control is how you react to those actions. Dmitri knows on some level that is true, but he still feels as though he bears the sin of his ancestor. Knowing that, does he even have the right to love the vessel of the goddess? There has been something I've been wanting to ask you. Are you planning on telling anyone about what I told you? About how the church has been lying about Nemesis and everything related to him. She looks him straight in the eye. As the king of Faerghus, it is a choice you will have to make. Truthfully, I am torn on the subject. Dmitri sighed. On one hand, those who died deserve to have their stories told. I find it disrespectful and abhorrent that history has all but erased them from existence, with all that remains of them being used as tools by the ignorant. He runs his hands through his hair in frustration. However, telling people, be it just those who have crests or everyone, will cause unrest and chaos. The very way we live and see the world will be called into question. Those like me, who are revered for our crests and our so-called connection to you, will likely be viewed as profane. Why couldn't things ever be easy? Regardless of the path he chooses, it will not be the right one. Even if I do choose to tell people the truth, I don't have any evidence to back my claims up. I can't just tell people that the goddess told me or that you exist inside Byleth. The consequences that could befall Byleth were unacceptable. The best case scenario is that I'm just declared crazy. The worst case would involve people claiming Byleth is lying and should be executed as a heretic. That is quite the conundrum. Suthis put her hand on her chin, in a move reminiscent of Byleth's own mannerisms. I suppose you don't need to make any decisions now, but it is important to keep the potential consequences in mind. He'd also been hoping to hear Byleth's opinions before he makes any decisions. Perhaps, I should also speak with the Archbishop. She will hopefully have some answers about the origins of the lies the Church has been preaching. I suppose that is one road to take. Though I do worry about the Church choosing to silence you if they see you as a threat. She walked up a few steps and sat down. You mean a lot to Byleth, seeing you hurt will hurt her. Dmitri has tried not to think about that. I will keep that in mind. He took a seat as well. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss? There are a couple of things I'd like to ask you. Her tone became contemplative. Once the war is over, what do you plan to do about the kingdom's relationship with the Church? You know about the lies they've spread, so I can't imagine you'd be comfortable keeping such close ties if things remain as they are. It seems the goddess never asks easy questions. That is complicated. I cannot simply cut ties with the Church. It is too important to the culture of Faerghus and it would put my position as king into question. My people need stability before I can make any changes they would accept. That makes sense. Suthis yawned. I apologize, I usually sleep when Byleth does, so it's a little odd to be talking here with you. Dimitri chuckled. It is all right. What was your other question? The goddess got a glint in her eye that made him feel uneasy. Suthis straightened her posture. What are your intentions towards Byleth? You have made it abundantly clear that you intend for the two of you to resume your romantic relationship, but do you have some sort of plan? Dimitri had faced many opponents on the battlefield, from bandits to demonic beasts to his beloved and her father. None have made him feel this afraid. Byleth is important to me as so much more than my vessel. I'm not demanding you tell me what your exact plans are, I wouldn't hesitate to tell her about them, but she's been through so much. She looked at him pleadingly. I just want her to be happy. It makes Dimitri happy to hear that Byleth has someone in her life who cares so much. He stands up and bows before Suthis again. That is what I want for Byleth too. I want us to get married and be together again. There is nothing I want more than to spend all the time I can working to bring a smile to her face. Byleth deserves better than him. Dimitri is quite certain she's too good for everyone, but if she still loves him, he wants to give her everything. As for exact plans, I have none. Suthis frowned at that. Please do not mistake my meaning, Dimitri rushes to assure her. I have numerous ideas, they just need to be refined a bit. Thank you for the reassurance, it is nice to get clarification that people besides me and her father still care about Byleth. Suthis yawned again. And now I think it's time for the both of us to get back to our resting. Byleth found a few good job opportunities, so we'll need an early start. She even sounded tired now. I bid you a good night. Sleep well, Dimitri said as the throne room and Suthis began to fade away. There is never a dull moment when his beloved was involved. He wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 13, A New Job. Dimitri woke up to a beautiful sight. Byleth was huddled under the blankets of the bed he had left free for her, and the sun was hitting her at just the right angle to illuminate her without shining directly on her face, so it wasn't waking her up. If things hadn't changed, he might have been waking up to a similar sight every morning by now. However, like Byleth had told him before, not all the changes were bad. Many lost loved ones had returned to them and there was a chance he could end the war much earlier. Once they were together again, his and Byleth's relationship might even have the chance to be better. Before things were altered during their invasion on Shamhala, Byleth was going to be Archbishop while he was the king of all Fodlan. They likely would have had to spend long periods of time apart. Now that Byleth had no official ties to Garreg Mach Monastery or the church in general, they could remain at each other's sides all the time if that was their desire. If Byleth wanted, she could just be his queen. Dimitri got up from the chair he had been sleeping on and stretched. A lot needed to be done today, but he was loath to wake up his beloved. She looked so peaceful, and he's not sure when she turned in for the night. Luckily, before he had to decide, Byleth began to stir. She was looking right at him when she opened her bleary eyes. Seeing her like this made him recall the conversation he'd had with the goddess in his dreams, causing him to flush. Byleth looked confused. Why are you blushing? We've slept in proximity to each other almost every night since we started this journey. So, why are you suddenly so embarrassed? Byleth cut herself off as realization seemed to strike her. What did the gremlin do? She jolted, sharply looking to the side as if something had touched her. You know exactly what I'm referring to. It took Dimitri longer than it should have to realize what was happening. Byleth figured out Suthis had done something, called the goddess a gremlin, and got involved in a disagreement with Suthis. Right before I fell asleep you were acting suspiciously. No, I am not imagining things. It was rather interesting watching a conversation where he could only hear one side. Though, Dimitri could imagine how Suthis was reacting, given their conversation. It was also nice to see Byleth so animated. Even when she was irritated, his beloved was beautiful to behold. Dimitri shook his head. As nice as it was to see Byleth like this, they did have work to do, and he was interested in seeing what jobs his beloved had found. Besides, he was certain she was hungry. Excuse me, not to interrupt, Byleth abruptly stopped talking and looked over at him. Suthies pulled me out of an unpleasant dream, that is all. Byleth still looked suspicious. Since we are both up, why don't we get some breakfast then go over the potential jobs you found last night? Byleth nodded. That sounds like a good plan. After they left the inn, Byleth and Dimitri made their way to a bakery to pick up some breakfast. Byleth found them a bench to sit on while Dimitri went to get the food. She was fine with the arrangement, it gave her a moment alone to find out what Suthies was up to. I haven't done anything bad. I am allowed to speak with people besides you, am I not? It is the nature of the conversation that is worrying her. The fact neither of them will divulge any information was also suspicious. I promise, there is nothing for you to worry about. I was just worried about the boy after the day we all had. I wanted to check up on him. Dimitri had been rather shaken. Before they could continue their discussion, Dimitri exited the bakery carrying a small bag. He looked around until he spotted her and approached with a smile, holding out the bag. They had sweet buns, so I grabbed us a few. He opened the bag and Byleth could smell them. They smelled so good. There were 4 sweet buns, so she grabbed 2 of them. Byleth immediately bit into one and happily gobbled it up. She looked over at Dimitri and noticed he hadn't started eating, he was just smiling at her. She swallowed her food. Is something wrong? No, not at all. I simply enjoy watching you eat, you always look so happy. He took a bite of his own sweet bun, but never took his eyes off her. Byleth quickly ate her second sweet bun, then relaxed on the bench. I found 3 potential jobs last night. I know which one I'd prefer to take, but I would also like to hear your thoughts. She held up one finger. First is defending a caravan on its way to Derdriu from potential bandit attacks. Byleth raised another finger. Next, is helping a local doctor. He wants protection for his assistants while they collect herbs in the forest. The last one was different. Byleth wasn't sure what Dimitri would initially think of it. Dimitri was about to begin eating his second sweet bun. What is the third job? A rich merchant with some title is looking to hire someone to find and rescue his kidnapped fiancé. Byleth looked out towards the street. He even knows her approximate location. Dimitri followed her gaze. Why does it sound like there's more to it than what you're saying? It appears that the boy's instincts are good. Byleth smiled. I'll give you a hint, his last name is Claiborne. He looked startled. Isn't that the name of the merchant who tried to kidnap Ingrid? The one Dorothea said was thriving off blood money. You would be correct. She was hoping he'd remember the name. Why would you want to take a job from such a person? Dimitri stood up and began to pace the length of the bench. Unless you suspect there is something more to his request. Byleth smiled. You know, people with wealth and titles tend to think very little of the intelligence of mercenaries. I could not tell you how many times prospective employers have lied to my father to get him to take a job. Byleth looked up at the sky. Once a merchant wanted to hire us to guard some of his goods and it turned out that he'd stolen most of it from a local village. What he really wanted was for us to scare off the rightful owners. Dimitri looked outraged. That's despicable. Byleth shrugged. When talking with possible employers, it is important to pay close attention to what they say and how they act. Geralt likes to learn about them from multiple outside sources before accepting any jobs of larger magnitudes like this. Geralt was better at this than her. She hopes her explanations makes sense. That seems like a lot of work. Maybe, but it's that or potentially hurt innocent people. Or get scammed out of money. Byleth looked over at Dimitri. I'm almost completely certain that Claiborne was lying. Dimitri brought a hand up to his chin. Do you think he doesn't have a kidnapped fiancé? Or is it something else? Based off the information I have and how he tried to kidnap Ingrid, I think it's possible there's a woman he wants to marry for whatever reason who is not here. Do you think what he really wants is for us to kidnap her? Byleth nodded. Exactly. He might actually be engaged, as far as he is concerned, and the woman ran away or was saved by someone she knows. She leaned back in her seat. Or there's never been an engagement and he's trying to trick us into dragging some poor random person to him. Dimitri's expression became steely. We need to take that job. If we don't, someone else will, someone who might not notice or care about how suspicious all this is. He slammed a fist into the palm of his hand. I will not stand by as some poor woman is taken to such a dastard. That got Byleth to smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Dmitri only briefly saw the merchant who was hiring them. Byleth was worried about him being recognized as the man in question held a court title and might have seen the king of Faerghus, at least in passing. That suited Dmitri fine. Knowing the horrors Claiborne had committed caused his blood to boil, and losing his temper would not aid them. Despite his rage at the situation, it had been breathtaking to watch his beloved. He knew that Byleth was manipulating the merchant to get the information so they could save his fiancée, but if he hadn't been made aware of the situation ahead of time, Dmitri doubted he would have suspected anything. The merchant certainly didn't seem to deduce anything was afoot. Shouldn't merchants be more adept at detecting deceit and swindlers? Byleth was doing a wonderful job at putting the scum at ease, telling him what he wanted to hear and assuring him they'd return his bride home safely. She wasn't telling a single lie as far as he could tell. It was all in the phrasing. His beloved was so smart. Dmitri couldn't hear everything that was being said from his position on the road with the horses, but based on the merchant's jovial facial expressions and open body language, he was likely pleased with what Byleth was telling him. Dmitri was eager to get going. After facing Maurice, he wanted to do something good for people. Saving an innocent woman from a cruel fate was a worthy task for anyone to take on. Even if he wasn't in need of an undertaking that would help others, he would have jumped at the opportunity to assist in such an endeavor. Perhaps after they were done, he and his beloved could relax for a bit. While traveling to Shamhala to investigate its defenses was exceedingly important, unless one counted stopping to sleep at night, they had been traveling without breaks for months. He could certainly handle their pace, and Byleth didn't seem to be having issues either, but some time to let their bodies rest might do them some good. If Byleth found the idea unpalatable, perhaps their journey back could be more leisurely. Maybe he could even get her to agree to go somewhere nice for a meal, provided they had the funds for such things. He's not even sure if they did many activities couples typically take part in after their engagement. Byleth would know, but she was unlikely to disclose the information to him. He remembers taking her out for a meal during their time at the officers' academy together, in thanks for her help with his efforts to teach the orphans, but that hardly counted. They were not even close to being romantically involved at the time. Things are different now. It would be nice to do things with Byleth that normal couples got to enjoy, even if Byleth is resistant to the idea. He knows it's not out of lack of feelings for him, and if he frames it just right. Dmitri. Byleth is standing mere feet from him. I have our destination, it's time to go. She mounts her horse. Luckily enough, our destination is on the way to Gonril territory, so we won't be going out of our way. Dmitri quickly climbed on his steed and urged it forward. How far is it from our current location? Byleth pulls out a map and shows it to him. About a day's ride from here. We will mostly be following the main road, before turning off it to enter a small village. The horses continued to walk, and once they were far enough away from their employer's place of business, Dmitri turned to his companion. Did Claiborne even make an attempt to hide how suspicious all this looks? If a woman was indeed kidnapped, would her assailants really be hiding her in a small village off the main road? Especially one that is so close by. His beloved shook her head. He probably thinks we're unintelligent. His kind usually believes they are smarter than everyone, especially those below them in station. Most people tend to believe mercenaries are uneducated in general. Why would he even want some village girl as his wife? Dmitri just doesn't understand it. I'm not saying she must be ugly or unintelligent, but men of his station tend to desire to marry up, not down. Like his attempts with Ingrid. It's likely that his so-called fiancée has something he wants. Byleth shrugged. Access to something rare and important, a useful talent, perhaps she has a crest. There is also a chance she is truly beautiful, and he wants her for that. Her voice became cold. There are men out there who simply decide a woman should be theirs, that they are entitled to have them, and do not care what anyone else has to say about the matter. The mere idea makes Dmitri's blood run cold. How could anyone treat another person like that, regardless of status? He understands that marriage is not always about love, in nobility it rarely is, but there should always be some level of respect. And wanting a prisoner for a wife? That's just despicable. Just thinking about forcing someone to be his unwilling bride makes him feel ill. For all his current grievances with Byleth, he could never imagine forcing her to be at his side. What would the point be if she didn't want to be there? Dmitri shook his head to clear it. Once the war was over, he was going to take a look at some of the marriages amongst the nobility. He didn't want to suspect anyone of such heinous acts, but if Byleth's implication that such occurrences were not wholly uncommon was true, he could not let them stand. He'd been meaning to enact reforms in various places once the kingdom was stable again. Marriage is one of the areas that Dmitri would like to focus on. The situation he and Byleth are currently dealing with is not the only one of its kind. Just remembering all that Sylvain and Ingrid had gone through and how their experiences shaped them in numerous ways were further reasons to want to make changes. While, yes, crests played a part in all of it, Dmitri is certain many would go through similar lengths to gain a new and/or better titles. Some would also strictly be in it for the money. There should be some level of protection. Dmitri is not sure what exactly he needs to do, but with the war not ending anytime soon, he has time to figure it out. And if some of those potential marriage-related reforms allow, say, a king to wed a mercenary more easily, well, that would just be a coincidence. Things escalated rather quickly, have they not? That was an understatement. Byleth and Dmitri had found the kidnapped woman, who was sitting at home having dinner with her family. She'd never even met Claiborne before and had no idea what was going on. They'd warned the family about the situation and had barely gotten back on the road when they were surrounded by bandits. She could see the Dem merchant in the distance watching them. He was shouting something, but he was too far for her to make out the words. Were they following us? Dmitri was looking at the bandits in confusion. If he was going to come anyway, why would he bother hiring mercenaries in the first place? That was a very good question. He probably wanted friendlier faces to drag her to the main road, then wanted the bandits to take out whoever he hired so he wouldn't have to pay them or deal with their anger over being lied to. Bandits were usually cheaper to deal with, and they would likely want to loot the village to make more money from the endeavor. Byleth dismounted from her horse. She was a better combatant on foot and didn't want it to get hurt. If it ran off in the confusion, she would just have to catch it later. I do not like this. Dmitri's voice was cold. What if some of the bandits slip by us and attack the village? Even if the woman and her family we warned have managed to leave quickly, everyone else would be in danger. Then we don't let them get past us. Just be careful. The boy is right, if even one person gets by you, innocent people could get hurt. Byleth just hoped that Dmitri would stay calm. She'd wanted to take this job because it looked like one where they could save someone without strings. She hadn't expected things to spiral like this. Perhaps this will give him the opportunity to vent some of his frustrations on the criminals surrounding you. Byleth blocked an oncoming blade with her sword. That was possible, but Dmitri could just as easily lose himself on the battlefield. He hadn't done that in forever before, everything had happened, but it was all too easy to backslide with old habits. It had been a while since they'd shared a battlefield with him this riled up. Well, not when facing people at any rate. She took out one assailant with Nosferatu and another with her silver sword. The bandits were not especially skilled, but there were a lot of them. Thankfully, it did not take Byleth long to clear her side of the field. Now she just needed to see how Dmitri was doing. The boy appears to be fine, if not a bit overzealous. Byleth hurriedly made her way over to where she last saw Dmitri fighting. The ground was littered with bandits, but Dmitri was gone. That only left one opponent. Sure enough, Dmitri had made his way towards their employer and had taken out his guards. Byleth isn't sure if it is a good sign or not that he had dropped his lance. I think it might be best if you get over there. When she doesn't move, Suthies continues. Are listening? Quickly now, I want to see what is happening. Dmitri had reached his destination and picked up Claiborne. Seeing that had knocked Byleth out of her stupor and she rushed over. By the time she got near them, the merchant had begun to speak again and she immediately understood why Dmitri looked so murderous. That girl belongs to me. If you've taken her beyond my reach, maybe I should help myself to yours. That was the wrong thing to say. Dmitri, who had been holding the awful man up by the front of his shirt, reached his free hand towards the merchant's face. When the boy was feral, I think I can recall him killing people by crushing their faces from your memories. Yes, but Dmitri wouldn't do that now, would he? That man did just threaten you. Shit. Byleth made to go stop him, but before she even got close Dmitri froze. No, I am better than this. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I will not tread that path again. Dmitri noticed her presence and dropped the merchant who crawled over to her. Please don't hurt me. I'll pay you good money, he blubbered. Byleth kicked him in the head to knock him out. I am sorry. Dmitri looked mournful as he walked over. I should not have done that, especially not in front of you. You deserve better than to see me like that. Byleth isn't so sure she agrees with that. If someone she cared about was threatened in front of her, she would react violently as well. If Byleth hadn't used Divine Pulse to save lives on the battlefield, she'd probably react in a similar way to threats to or deaths of her students in a similar way. No one is perfect. Expecting that from yourself will only bring negativity into your life. Byleth put a hand on his shoulder. The important thing is that you stopped yourself. Most people, especially when they are angry, wouldn't have that kind of control. She gave him a slight squeeze. That man is not a good person and has committed many crimes. You would not be held in contempt for killing him. However, you knew it was wrong and acted accordingly. Not many people have that kind of strength. Dmitri took that hand that was on his shoulder into his own. Before she could react, he kissed the back of it. Thank you for your kind words. Byleth pulled her head from his and turned so he wouldn't see her red cheeks. Suthies began to laugh. There's no need to feel embarrassed. It's not like this is the first time he has kissed your hand. She really doesn't need the commentary. Ha. I liven things up. You would miss it if I stopped sharing my observations. Maybe. What should we do with the remaining men? Dmitri had picked up the unconscious merchant. We cannot leave them like this. That was a good point, leaving them like this would not solve anything. We'll tie up those who are still alive and then take them to the village. Someone there should be able to contact some knights or something to pick them up. Once they were done with that, she and Dmitri could finally continue their journey. Even without getting paid for this job they should have enough funds to get them to their destination if they didn't stop at any inns and hunted for a few more meals. Dmitri smiled at her. That sounds like an excellent plan. He actually seemed calmer now that the battle was over. It is possible he just needed to get all his aggression out in the open. Bottling up like he tends to is rarely a healthy choice to make. Hopefully things will settle down now. Chapter 14, Locating the Enemy. The rest of their journey to Goneril territory was thankfully uneventful. They'd been attacked by bandits a few times, but it was nothing that she and Dmitri could not handle. After their last two jobs Dmitri seemed to be more at ease with himself. He'd bought a small journal in a town they traveled through and had taken to writing in it every night. When she asked what he was writing about, he'd vaguely told her it was for ideas. Byleth hadn't wanted to pry so she dropped the subject. He was also staring at her more than usual. Considering how often he watched her previously, it was quite the accomplishment. Dmitri wasn't being creepy about it or anything, but it put her on edge nonetheless. As a result, Byleth had done her best to keep physical contact between them to a minimum. She'd been too lenient with that since their trip began and it needed to stop. She remembers overhearing Sylvain compare Dmitri to a puppy once. Felix had said it was annoying how Dmitri would follow her around and constantly stare at her. Byleth hadn't really noticed any of it before, but she was seeing it now. Dmitri had also tried on multiple occasions to convince her to stop in a town and find a nice place to eat. The first few times she said no because they needed to conserve their funds, but as time went on, he would suggest they find a small job and then have a nice meal. He seemed especially disappointed when she pointed out that if they wanted to make good time on their journey back, they shouldn't make any long stops. After that the requests got smaller. If there was a route they could take that would pass by a pretty landscape, he would argue to take it. If he was successful, he would oh so innocently suggest that they stop to have a meal or take in the sights. Not for long, but they needed to eat or let the horses rest. He was getting more devious. Byleth was honestly getting impressed. Subtly had never been Dimitri's strong suit, so at least he's learning. Clearly, Dimitri had not given up on the idea of them getting back together. Byleth had no idea what else she could do to dissuade him from the notion. His persistence was frustrating. As nice as it was to have more company than just Suthies and to have backup in battle, maybe she should have tried harder to get him to go home when he showed up at Xanadu. This whole trip seems to have strengthened his resolve, but what else could she have expected? You wanted physical company, and you did miss him. Suthies' presence was a comfort like always. There is no shame in either. You are allowed to feel things. Things were simpler when she didn't have these emotions. Dimitri was enjoying the cool night air. It wasn't as cold as the nights in Faerghus, but the skies were just as clear. He'd never been to this part of Fodlan before and had been enjoying the sights. Just the other day he and Byleth had traveled past a breathtaking waterfall. She hadn't let them linger for too long, but it was a good spot to let their horses drink clean water, so she hadn't objected to a short break. Sadly, his beloved had been more distant than usual lately. Dimitri tried to get her to enjoy the view with him, but Byleth had chosen to look over their map instead. She'd barely responded when he tried to engage her in conversation. Perhaps letting his more beastly side out before had put her on edge. It's just so easy to let go when they are together. She has seen every side of him and never turned away. He doesn't need to keep up the kingly facade with her, but mayhap letting the mask fall too much put her off. No, she's seen him do worse and was proud of him for stopping himself. It is more likely that his intention for them to do more romantic things together was too transparent. He's been attempting to keep his requests reasonable, but his early attempts likely tipped her off. Dimitri has no idea what he was thinking when he started. Of course, they had to stick to a strict budget and schedule, they were not on a vacation. Dimitri would like to tell her outright what he is doing, he does not like how manipulative this plan feels. Sadly, Dimitri knows for a fact that Byleth would reject every suggestion he made if he was more upfront with her. That could also be detrimental to their trip. The two of them and their horses did need to eat and rest at regular intervals. Being with her again, in person not just in dreams, has reminded him of how well they work together. Being on the battlefield or off, it has always been so incredibly easy to fall into sync with Byleth. All Dimitri wants is the chance to make her happy, he knows he's capable of it. Byleth is only resistant towards everything because she has no hope for their future together. If Dimitri can show her how well they still fit together, maybe that could change. He just hopes that doing some simple, enjoyable things together, might soften Byleth to his company. Looking past the campfire, he can see his beloved sleeping. She looks so calm and peaceful, she never quite looks that way when awake. It is a beautiful sight to behold. Dimitri cannot help but wonder what she is dreaming about. While he's continued to see memories in his sleep, they have not had a shared dream since they began their journey together. Neither of them quite understands the dream connection they share, so he's not sure why that is. It's fine though, she's physically near him and they can talk all day if they so choose, he doesn't need to see her in dreams. Dimitri had tried to sleep earlier but when it wouldn't come, he opted to keep watch instead. When they were traveling with the Gloucester Knights the two of them had slept next to each other. Sleep had come easily then, but he wouldn't dare ask for such a thing now. Instead, to be productive he pulled out his newly acquired journal. It had occurred to him that while he had grand vague ideas for reforms he eventually wanted to put into place, he had not real plans on how to do so. Previously he'd told himself that as he wouldn't be able to do anything until the war was over and the people had stability again, there was no need to make plans that he would likely have to either alter or discard. Now he thought differently. He was walking amongst the common people and seeing the way they lived their lives. Dimitri was so overflowing with thoughts, observations, and ideas, that he needed to write them down. Waiting would do him no good. If he wants to make any positive change, he needs to carefully plan out his course of action. Nothing will get done if he leaves things to chance. When he returned to Faerghus, he needed to find a way to walk amongst the common people there as well. While the common folk likely do not live terribly differently from region to region, there are likely distinctions he wouldn't consider on his own. Dimitri wants to build a better kingdom, to make it a place where all can live their lives happily. Such a thing is realistically improbable, but by striving for it an untold number of lives could be improved. His people deserve it, his friends deserve it, and if she chooses to stay in his lands, he wants to give it to his beloved as well. It does not take Byleth long to find the approximate location of Shambhala. Given the years that have gone by, she's a bit fuzzy on the entrance's exact location, but with a little looking she should be able to find it. I believe it would be safe to assume the entrance is hidden, correct? Dmitri was securing their horses to a tree. I doubt it will be easily spotted if so. Byleth walked out of the shade the forest provided. There is a hidden entrance somewhere, I just can't quite recall where. It was really bothering her. How could she have let the memory fade? You've been dealing with quite a bit. Besides, it's been years since you needed this knowledge. True, but still. She is a strategist, it's her job to know these kinds of things. It's not like Dmitri or any of the others would remember anything about Shambhala. You're too hard on yourself. Suthies giggled. It's one of the many things you and the boy have in common. Dmitri put a hand on her shoulder. I'm sure that with a little looking, you'll see something you recognize. He shrugged. Perhaps I'll even recover more memories in the process. Byleth did find it odd that she could remember everything they went through up until that explosion during their invasion of Shambhala, while his memoirs stopped at their engagement. There was a fairly large chunk of time between the two events. It is rather strange. I suppose there is a chance that our connection is responsible for that. That was possible, but ultimately it did not matter, it might even be better this way. Dmitri was already having a difficult time in letting go of their past. If he could remember what they were like as a couple, it would undoubtedly be harder. Dmitri's hand traveled from her shoulder to her own hand. Let's get going. He walked forward and tugged her along with a smile. The sooner we start, the sooner we find something recognizable. Byleth took her hand out of his and pulled the hood of her cloak over her head. We'll need to be careful. The Agarthans likely have ways of watching the area. She quickly turned from his dejected expression. We shouldn't get too close to the mountains. Try as he might, Dmitri could not recognize anything. While he agreed that discretion was necessary, it certainly made it harder to find something that could jog either of their memories. They had been walking so long, he suspected they might be in HRYM territory by now. At this point he was mostly following an increasingly frustrated Byleth. She was probably still irritated with herself over forgetting where the entrance to Shambhala was. He could understand, but he wished she would go easier on herself. Like she told him before, expecting perfection would only cause grief. Byleth has done so much for so many, she shouldn't beat herself up for something like this. Dmitri was so distracted by his thoughts that he almost stumbled into Byleth, who had stopped short. Byleth? Is something wrong? He moved to stand at her side but could not see what caught her attention. She gestured towards part of the nearby mountain. The entrance is hidden amongst the rocks over there. Luckily it appeared as though the place they were standing in wasn't visible from that spot. Hopefully any watch they had wouldn't notice them. Is there a way we can be sure it's there now? Dmitri isn't sure how entrances to underground cities work. The Agarthans had strange weapons, so it might be the case that they could move something like a doorway. Given the structure of the entrance and how you get to the city proper from it, I doubt moving it would be easy. She tilted her head to the side. If the entrance was moved, we'd see some evidence of it, but it looks exactly as I remember it. Then she honored him with a smile. I think we should leave now that we've accomplished our main goal. That made sense. The longer we stay the more likely we are to be seen. Perhaps we could remain in the area though. It seemed like such a shame to have come all this way and leave as soon as they located the entrance. If we keep watch on the area, we might find some Agarthans outside. Byleth's eyes lit up. We might be able to get new information. Dmitri loved seeing her like this. Exactly. They'd made camp behind a tree line that overlooked the canyon. Anyone who wanted to get in or out of Shambhala would have to pass through. They'd probably stay a few days or until they managed to get some information, whichever came first. They couldn't stay here forever, Dmitri knew that, but he wanted to spend as much time as he could with his beloved. The trip back would probably be faster and Byleth was barely letting him stand near her now. It was maddening to be so close, yet so far. Will we take on any more jobs as we travel back? He'd enjoyed most of them, so he wouldn't object to doing more. Byleth put her hand on her chin. We might have to. She held up the bag they kept their money in. Our funds are running low, but we should be able to get by with only taking small jobs. We've already been gone for 4 moons, our time away is running out and I don't want to be late. Dmitri laid back in the grass with a groan, earning him a laugh. I am not looking forward to the lectures I am guaranteed to get for sneaking off. Between Ingrid, Felix, Didu, and Rodrigue it was never going to end. They are never going to let me out of their sights again. Well, the king did sneak off and disappear without a word. Her voice sounded so light. What else were you expecting? Truthfully, when he'd made his plans to go with Byleth he hadn't thought ahead. Dmitri knew there would be consequences, but seeing Byleth and spending any amount of time with her was worth it. For a while it seemed like she was more open to his company too. Before they go their separate ways, he needs to know for certain one way or another if there is any faith in her for them. She is the only woman he will ever love or want to marry, but he needs to know exactly what she thinks, without the walls or doubts. Dmitri sits up and looks over at her. Byleth gaze is fixed on the canyon. Beloved, I've asked you not to call me that. He can see her fists clench. He tried not to feel too upset. She had asked him on multiple occasions to not use that term of endearment, yet he continues to ignore her request. It's just no one could ever compare to her. Simply being near her makes him feel happy. Before he could try again there was a sound from the other side of the tree line that, causing them both to pause. They stared at each other for a moment before jumping into action. Byleth went to make sure their horses were secure while he grabbed their weapons. They crouched low to the ground and eventually spotted a group of people walking in the dark, coming from the direction of the canyon. Do you think those are Agarthans? Maybe, Byleth said with uncertainty. I don't know how to tell for certain unless they have those bird masks. There had to be more ways to tell than that. What about physical features? Are there no commonalities? He was struggling to remember. Then it hit him. Their skin. Their skin. Finally, he was being useful. I've only seen a few Agarthans without their disguises, Thales, Solon, and Kroina. Dmitri felt Byleth tense at the last name. They didn't look too much alike, but they all had pale skin. So pale it almost looked white. So, if whoever is coming closer has skin that pale, they are likely from Shambhala. Now they just had to wait. Byleth shifted next to him. If only it wasn't so dark. They could be right next to us, and we wouldn't be able to tell what they looked like. Well, they have torches. There's a chance we'll see any masks and the like when they get closer. The group was too close for Byleth to risk answering, but he could feel her nod in agreement. They both gripped their weapons tighter. They would hopefully know for certain soon. Byleth hated waiting. She understood that it was often necessary, but sitting around was never her strong suit. Here they come, said Dmitri in a low voice. As the group got closer, their torches did a good job at lighting their way. Most of the area was illuminated and Byleth was thankful that she had repositioned the horses. It didn't take long for them to get close enough for her and Dmitri to make out their features. Some were wearing bird masks and all of them had pale, almost pure white, skin. Dmitri nudged her arm and gestured towards the Agarthans. She nodded, and once the group was passing by their hiding spot, they sprang forward. A few of the Agarthans went down immediately, while the rest scrambled to defend themselves. Byleth dodged a few oncoming spells and slashed a few more Agarthans with her blade. Don't let any of them get away. Dmitri was taking care of the rest of the Agarthans behind her. He was right. Their biggest advantage right now is that the Agarthans do not know that she and Dmitri know about them, their history, or Shambhala. It's the Felstar. And now she's been recognized. Damn her green hair. I would have avoided the makeover if I could have. Byleth couldn't help but chuckle. Once she dispatched her final opponent, she turned to see that Dmitri was finishing up as well. Was that all of them? He wiped his brow. I believe so. He looked confused for a moment. Why do they refer to you as the Felstar? I know I've heard them call you that before. I think the fell star is Suthi's. The scriptures say she fell from the sky, right? At his nod she continued. I don't think they really see a difference between me and Suthi's, so. What I'd like to know is how they know about our connection. Suthi's sounded distracted. There are many conclusions that could have been drawn. All they should know is that you are at least part Nabatean and bear my crest. They know that not all the Nabateans are dead and how crests can be given to people, so how is it that they know you are my vessel? That is a very good question. Unfortunately, it is also one they currently do not have time for. We need to search the bodies for information and then leave the area. They are too close to Shamhala. If they are spotted, it wouldn't matter how powerful or skilled she and Dimitri are. They would be overrun. Of course. Dimitri went to search for any pertinent information. It would also be prudent to hide the bodies. We can buy ourselves time by letting the others believe these ones are still en route to their destination. That is a very good idea. I think there is a river that's not too far away. She'll have to look at the map. We can dump them there. With any luck the current will carry them far enough away to cause some confusion. Byleth, I think I found their marching orders. Dimitri was holding up a few papers. They say that this group is supposed to travel to Anbar and help maintain control. He looked up. Maintain control? Did they find a way to usurp Edelgard? He sounds like he can't believe it. Byleth cannot blame him. It is difficult to imagine Edelgard handing power over to anyone, let alone to her enemy. Didn't you tell me that Thales attacked the both of you? Yes, I defended Edelgard, but we were separated in the chaos. He clenches the papers in his hand. You don't think they took her and did something, do you? It's possible. If the Agarthans have managed to regain their foothold in Adrestia, then the war just got much more complicated. Chapter 15, Impending Separation. Time sped by quickly for Dimitri as they traveled towards their respective armies. He was apprehensive for a multitude of reasons. To start with, he wasn't looking forward to the scolding and lectures he was certain to get. He knows his actions were irresponsible, but Dimitri does not regret them. There's also Byleth. Dimitri is reluctant to leave her side in general, but he is also terrified for her safety. It at least appears as though the Agarthans have taken some level of control in the empire. Byleth is part of the Adrestian army, and they know who and what she is. What if they try to kill her? Even if she is near her father and fellow mercenaries, she will be vulnerable. He won't be there to protect her. Once they part ways, how will he know if she's safe? Dimitri knows how formidable she is as an opponent. He would not insult her by treating her as anything less, but not all battles are straightforward. Someone could poison her food, arrange an accident within the army's camp, use their knowledge of marching orders to set up an ambush. The potential threats were never-ending. Even if Byleth isn't with him, Dimitri just wants to know that she is safe. However, he is also aware that that is a naive thought. They are at war. Even if Byleth agreed to stay with him, she wouldn't be safe. Until the war was over, no one was safe. His beloved was doing her part to help end the war quicker, and he was grateful for that, though he did wish her methods of helping didn't put her at such risk. Knowing that she wasn't alone, she had her father, Alois, her fellow mercenaries, and Suthi's, was a balm on his soul, but he still felt on edge. Byleth deserved a life of peace and happiness, and he wants nothing more than to give it to her. The only question was how. Dimitri has already resolved to end the war as soon as possible and to find a way to recruit Geralt's mercenaries into his forces, but that is only the beginning. Once the war is over, they will still have an enemy to face. No one in Fodlan will ever be truly safe as long as the Agarthans are around to prey upon them. They will have to be taken care of. At least he knows the location of their city. Once his army has recovered from the war, they can invade again. With Byleth's knowledge, they should be able to avoid whatever caused them to relieve their lives. Maybe then his beloved will feel safe enough to come back to him. He could make her so happy, he knows he can. Dimitri has done it before. Byleth just needs to let herself be open to the possibility. Once that happens, he will not allow anyone to stand between them. As long as Byleth wants him at her side, he will be there. Dimitri had been quiet for the last few days. He'd been normal as they left the mountains in Hrym and went back through Goneril territory. As they traveled through towns and villages, he even started picking some of the smaller jobs they took. He had an eye for finding things that wouldn't take them out of their way but were still useful to the locals. The pay wasn't always the best, but Byleth didn't mind. As they neared Faerghus though, he became pensive. Sometimes she would catch him looking intensely at her, but Dimitri would always brush her off when Byleth asked. It was beginning to unnerve her. Byleth knew he was likely planning something, she just didn't know what it was. "The boy is still very much in love with you, that is clear," said Suthies. "Perhaps he is trying to create a plan to take you home with him." Again. He'd been trying one variation or another of that for around 2 years now. It was getting to her. And not in a "I want to give in" kind of way. It was more like a "I want to punch you" feeling that she was getting. I can understand why. His persistence is going from endearing to ill-mannered at this point. Her friend's tone took on an exasperated note. "You've been clear about your thoughts on the matter. Whether the two of you are in mutual love or not, that should be respected." Byleth was just so tried. It doesn't matter whether she still loved Dimitri or not, she has no desire to be his mistress. For all his optimism, the world is still the way it is. A king is not free to marry whosoever he chooses, much less someone low-born like her. If she ever enters a serious relationship, it will only be with someone who would be an equal partner. Between their class differences in her lifespan, she and Dimitri can't have that. Pretending otherwise would only invite more heartbreak later. Their circumstances were already painful enough, she did not wish to add to that. Loving each other is all well and good, but for a healthy relationship to come about and thrive, they need more. Byleth doesn't doubt his devotion, but sometimes it feels like Dimitri loves the idea of her more than her as a person. He's so desperate to reclaim what they once had that he doesn't notice or take into account their circumstances or how either of them had changed as people. Dimitri just goes on about how if she just said yes that they'd vaguely be happy and work things out. Being near each other wouldn't be enough to grant them lasting happiness. It could never be enough for anyone. Relationships of any kind take work, they can be messy, complicated things. Dimitri, with all his optimism about them, has only ever shown her a simplistic view on what them being together would be like. Byleth explains her grievances and issues, and he brushes them off. Dimitri will talk at length about how wonderful and smart she is, but he doesn't take into account what she says. Even if she did agree to resume their romantic relationship, what kind of life could they live together? They had completely different upbringings and consequently different values. He had been floored the other day when he found out that most people, including wandering mercenaries, can rarely afford trained doctors. While she hadn't known exactly what it was while growing up, most people would go to a local church for some faith healing. Dimitri had known that doctors were expensive but hadn't realized going to a church was so preferable. It probably hasn't even occurred to him that she was never all that enthused about becoming a queen or how much she personally didn't want to be the archbishop. She had duties and responsibilities though, so she never complained, but that didn't mean she enjoyed herself. She wasn't like Dimitri and the others, she was born and raised a mercenary. All she had to care about was her father and her next meal. Byleth wasn't brought up with the intent to take a high position or anything like it. She wasn't naturally built for it. Someone who was, likely couldn't even understand that. He is trying. Suthies' voice was soft. Please try to keep that in mind. The boy does love you, it just makes him single-minded. He probably doesn't realize how little you care for the trappings of nobility. Her voice became slightly reproachful. How could he if you've never told him? Honestly, the two of you, you're both so stubborn. It was their last day together. Another day of traveling, one more night of camping, and then they'd head their separate ways. Byleth was both looking forward to and dreading it. It was nice to spend time with Dimitri again, but constantly keeping her guard up around him was exhausting. She also missed her father and the others. This trip had been the first time she and Gerald had been separated since he died. Byleth was looking forward to seeing him again. Dimitri returned from scouting ahead. The road is clear. Where do you think we should stop for the night? The sky was rather cloudy, and she could smell rain in the air. We should probably find a place with decent cover. It will probably rain soon and it's difficult to say how long it will last. He walked over and took a look in one of the packs attached to her horse. We are also running low on food. If we could hunt or fish before the weather turns on us, that would be beneficial. Byleth wasn't familiar with the area, so they'd have to wait and see what was available. Let's keep going down the road and see what we can find. Of course. He was smiling at her again. Why was Dimitri so happy? They would be going in different directions in the morning. Shouldn't he be melancholy or something? Do you want him to be disheartened? It's not that she wanted Dimitri to be sad, he's just acting out of character. She looked over at where he was mounting his horse. What if he was planning something? It had been a little while since he'd asked her to return to the kingdom with him, but that didn't mean much. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. Thunder sounded overhead. We should hurry and find a good place to rest for the night, said Byleth. If this turns out to be more than just rain, I'd prefer that we not get caught in it. I have to agree. Dimitri patted his horse's neck. It would not be good if the horses were spooked. One of us could get hurt. The sky was beginning to make him nervous. A storm looked to be brewing and Dimitri did not relish the idea of traveling through it. He wanted his final night with his beloved to be one they could both enjoy. These last 5 moons had been wonderful. Not everything had been pleasant, but all in all he'd gained valuable experience and spent uninterrupted time with his beloved. While he'd hoped their relationship would have improved over the moons they spent together, that did not appear to have happened. He still had a day with her though, so he shouldn't complain. Byleth was a little ahead of him on the road and he couldn't help but look at her. It doesn't matter what they are doing, he always finds her so beautiful. They can be traveling, in combat, eating, etc. and he always finds it difficult to look away. Just the other day, they were clearing bandits out of some woods. Byleth was covered in sweat and blood, yet he'd still felt the desire to hold her. There's a cave up ahead. Byleth turned her horse of the path they'd been following. It should keep us dry when the rain starts. Dimitri followed and caught sight of the cave. That should work. Now they needed food and firewood. I can go hunting if that would ease your burden, beloved. Byleth looked displeased with the term of endearment but did not comment. I'll find firewood before everything gets wet. She wouldn't even look at him. Byleth, just find us some food. She had secured her horse inside the cave and was walking towards the foliage. We need to hurry before the storm hits. Animals are going to already be difficult to find as it is. Don't wait. As usual, his beloved was correct. Dimitri has always admired her keen mind and ability to navigate through situations with logic. Of course. He hurriedly puts his horse with hers and walks into the nearby woods with a lance and a javelin. If he's lucky he'll come across something soon. Byleth was correct, with the storm approaching most of the animals have hidden themselves. Everything is eerily quiet, and it is beginning to get cold. Dimitri wants to hurry and return to his beloved and the fire she has undoubtedly made, but he refuses to return empty-handed. It hasn't started raining yet, so he ought to be fine. He should probably loop back towards the cave though. It wouldn't be good to get lost, and if he was too far away when the storm hit, it could be dangerous. Before he leaves Byleth's side in the morning there is a conversation they need to have. Byleth has been very clear about her thoughts but hasn't said anything about her feelings. Dimitri has to know and Byleth deserves to put everything out in the open. He will not take her feelings for granted and will no longer make assumptions about her. What she does should be completely her choice. Dimitri will not question whatever she may tell him, even if it is not what he wants to hear. He should be grateful for whatever she chooses to give him. Dimitri had been walking for a few minutes when a few deer sped by. Reacting swiftly, he threw his javelin, hitting one in the side. The other deer were out of sight, but he only needed one. Dimitri cautiously approached his quarry and saw that it was still alive. To end its suffering, he brought his lance down on it and threw it over his shoulder. The deer was big enough that they should have an adequate dinner with enough meat left over for them to split when they parted ways. Even with the storm, the night should be a pleasant one. Dimitri is certain Byleth will be pleased with the deer, and he'll get to share another meal with her. By the time Dimitri returned with the deer, Byleth had already set up a fire, grabbed extra kindling, and given the horses water. All that was left to do was cook the meat and set up their bedrolls. She doesn't think they need the tents tonight, as the cave should adequately protect them from the elements. Look at what I managed to find. He seemed so pleased with himself. Byleth couldn't help but smile. That should get us a fair amount of meat. That just made him happier. I can skin the deer and cut off the meat if you get the skewers ready. Just looking at it was making her hungry. His smile got bigger. I will help in any way I can. They worked in silence, and it did not take long for the meat to begin cooking at the fire. It smelled so good, and she couldn't wait to eat. From here it shouldn't take me long to get back to my father. Byleth would have to figure out an abridged version of her journey to tell Geralt. Saying he'd be shocked that she spent the last 5 moons with the King of Faerghus would be an understatement. Once things have settled down, I'll try to send you what information I can. As if sensing the somber mood, rain started pouring from the sky. I'll try to figure out how deep the Agarthans have wormed their way back into the Empire. Dimitri put down the skewer he'd been eating from. I plan on going to Fhirdiad and then continuing on to where my army is stationed. He looked out at the rain. By the time we reach our destinations, I suspect it will be a moon, maybe 2 before the fighting picks up again. He chuckles and turns back to her. Perhaps we will face each other on the battlefield again. Byleth shakes her head in exasperation. Just watch your shoulder better this time. I will endeavor to do so. He was smiling again. I am sure my professor would be very disappointed if I failed to learn from my mistakes. Probably. Byleth looks at the remaining skewers. There were only a few left, and once they were gone the 2 of them should probably prepare to sleep. They both had a way to go, and traveling alone made stopping to rest riskier. They should take advantage of their safety in the other's presence while they could. We should go to bed soon. The both of us need an early start in the morning. Dimitri nodded in agreement. That does seem like a wise idea. It might also be beneficial to get our things together. If there are any delays in the morning, we won't have to worry about packing. It was then that the rain picked up and started to get in the cave, getting close to the fire and startling them both. I doubt the fire will last long. Dimitri was blushing. Why was he blushing? If you do not find it troubling or inappropriate, it might be prudent to sleep next to each other. His blush intensified, reaching all the way to his ears. Please do not mistake my request. I merely wish to ensure that we both remain warm throughout the night. It was a reasonable request. Byleth kept her face blank. I have no objections. Fantastic. There was that smile again. Though his blush had not gone away. Shall we set up the bedrolls then? Byleth desperately hoped this would not become awkward. Check the description for the links to the author.